Hi everyone, today I want to bring you a pretty interesting new rogue server that I've played lately, and that is based around the Andariel's Visage. So this is an uber unique that is commonly regarded as a pretty trash tier item. The main reason probably why it's a uber unique is because it's the only source of lifesteal in the game. That is potentially pretty game breaking. At least we know that from other games. Lifesteal, especially when you do millions and billions of damage, can be pretty ridiculous. And it turns out this item is not for some reason. So there is something up with lifesteal, just not really functioning as you would expect. As far as I know, it just kind of scales down with the monster level going up, so it doesn't really do that much for most builds anymore. But regardless of that, there is another effect on this item, and this is the Poison Nova. And this is what the build is actually based around. So we use this poison trigger effect in this build exclusively to deal damage, and it turns out that I actually can do a lot of damage. So you see me here right now, this is just like some stuff I put together. This was like one of my first runs, cruising through a 72 pit here on my hardcore rogue, and this was with like absolute trash tier gear. So I just gambled like a set of items for like 2000 nobles, put it on, and I started blasting with like 4 out of 12 masterwork. So that's kind of what I was doing here, plus the Andariel's Visage, of course. So it turns out it's actually a pretty powerful build, especially for farming. You have a lot of conditional, like freeze and stun and all these kinds of damage multipliers that can boost this Andariel's Visage procs. And when I was playing this for like around an hour or so, we were seeing some ticks on staggered bosses going up to like 50 million or so. And that can be way improved once you get better gear, once you optimize this further. So I have a planner for you where I just spend some more time min-maxing everything. And it's a pretty simple build. It's essentially just a puncture build that triggers Andariel's, and that does all these like poison novas around. You see them here sometimes going off. And well, this is the build. So it's just mobility and puncture and maybe a caltrops that you throw on the boss. So very straightforward to play, very fun actually, because you just walk into packs, everything gets frozen and stunned and knocked down, because we have the shared misery aspect here to spread all the crowd controls easily to the entire pack, and then you stagger the boss and that's it. And to show a little bit the power of what this can do, we have a clip here that someone sent this to me. This is Uber Lilith with an Andariel's rogue as well, and as you can see here, this damage can ramp up a lot more when you really go for it. So my setup here is not as all in as I expect this one to be, but you see here multiple hundreds of millions on a big stagger nuke. When you have good gear, when you have really high attack speed and the elements aspect comes around, the boss is staggered, this can do some serious damage here. So Andariel's rogue actually seems to be on the menu, and I will show you what it's all about. Unfortunately, I had a pretty sad rip right after I started working on this setup, which actually leads me to not being able to play this anymore, to like min-max this further, and I'm also just playing another rogue build right now, the Poison Barrage, which is pretty fun too, and also very powerful. But for the Andariel's enjoyers, we have this planner here. So that's what I made. And this just seems to be like an overall really solid all-around farming build in particular. I think you can easily go up to like 80, 85, maybe even 90s or so comfortably in like 3 to 4 minute runs or so. So this is a pretty effective farming build, almost rivaling Heartseeker and like other some of the top builds like Rapid Fire and some builds like that. So it definitely turns out if you have an Andariel's Visage, you should not throw it away if you want to play a build like that. So as I mentioned, we rely on puncture, so we have a lot of attack speed in this build and a lot of lucky hit, and we also have the chance to cast puncture twice. Like this we get insane amounts of lucky hit. So we use the triple puncture here, so we have 3 knives with 35% base lucky hit chance, so you get 2 of them every time, so it's like 70, and then you get 3 knives, so you have like 210% lucky hit combined per attack, and it can probably attack around 3 times per second or so. So we're talking about like 500, 600% lucky hit per second or so, just pumping into a boss. And this means that you proc Andariel's Visage multiple times per second on average. So like this, you ramp up the dot a lot and really quickly, and there's no like inconsistency, there's no downtime. You rush into a pack, you will instantly get those procs. Everything else on the skill tree and in the items is just based on boosting this damage to the maximum. There are a lot of like poison synergies on the rogue, in particular for the glyphs as well. For example, you have the Bane glyph here, gives you a chance to deal double damage with the poison, 15% chance, pretty good. And we also have, for example, Tracker that extends the duration of the poison. So especially on boss fights, you can ramp up a lot more poison this way. This is a huge multiplier as well, 40% longer poisons. So instead of 5 seconds, they go 7 seconds. And then there's a bunch of other stuff here that just like helps it out with more damage. For example, we have the exploit weakness, so you can ramp up this 25% damage buff very easily. We have cheap shot, so especially in packs, you get a big multiplier there. And the rest is just, yeah, better glyphs and like some life and damage reduction that we pick up everywhere. So there's a bunch of rest here as well. But otherwise, we take like life here, we take life there, life on the starter board, and so on. So it's just like a fairly solid tanky setup that I made here with good gear. Yeah, this goes up to like almost 55k life. And you can have even more if you want, because for example, this has 1900 dex as well. So you can replace some of the decks with more life if you really want to push high and be more tanky. But I think I have like a pretty nice all-rounder here. And the attack speed is extremely high in this build because we run close quarters combat. So we already get 30% from that. We have rapid aspect, that's another 30. So we have 60. Then we have Moonrise, that's another 20. So we have 80. We have a lot of attack speed here. And there can be even more that you just put on your gear. So the gloves and the rings and also the Andariel's Visage itself all have attack speed. So just kind of like standing here with this gear, you see we already have 66% attack speed, and this is only with masterworking on the Andariel. The other crit masterworks actually go to other stats on the other slots. So you easily cap out your attack speed in at least the first cap, which goes up to 100% with a few multipliers, including the base gear. And then you get even more from rapid and from close quarters, and you have something like a 150-ish % attack speed bonus, so you attack extremely fast. Because this is a close quarters build, you need to stack damage versus crowd controlled enemies, so we have that on all of the offensive tempers. So you see this here on the rings, the amulet, the weapons, and the glove. So I have a lot of this damage versus crowd controlled. Roughly 1000% or so is what you can hit with really good gear, and some stuff on the paragons. This also means that you will have kind of a weakness against non-staggered bosses. So it's totally fine to like walk into a pack, you will crowd control them easily. But bosses, you will only really deal good damage when you stagger them. This is like a common curse of the rogue, but more amplified for the melee builds or for close quarters builds because of this damage versus crowd control. So keep that in mind. If you try to push very high in the pit, like let's say beyond tier 100 or tier 105 or 110 or so, the boss fights will get very, very long because at some point you can't stagger them anymore. And then you kind of lose a lot of your damage multipliers. And to go with the same theme, you have a lot of these aspects here that give us damage against crowd controlled enemies. So you have Noxious Eyes when enemies are frozen, then you deal extra poison damage to them. We have Concussive Strikes when they are dazed, you deal extra damage to them. We have Retribution when they are stunned or knocked down, you deal extra damage to them. Because we don't really have like skill specific aspects we can put here. We already have like the attack speed ones here, Rapid and Moonrise for example. There's Elements, it's just kind of like some last resort here. And Inner Calm also, if you stand still, or just sometimes like a basic 10% damage buff here. And that's basically it. There's not really that many good aspects you can put in this. So we really rely on those CCs and we really rely on the stagger nukes. So when you try to play this build, I really recommend try to farm on like a comfortable tier where bosses just die in like 2 staggers or so. You can stagger them really fast and that's it. So I would not really take this into like beyond tier 100. Defensively, we have a lot of good aspects. We have Might, so this just goes with any rogue build pretty much that has a generator, a very nice aspect. We have the Umbers here that gives us the Dark Shrouds, so you invest into Dark Shrouds. We put like all the points in there. We have the chest as well that can give you extra ranks to Dark Shroud. This is a lot of damage reduction. You want to make sure you have this, and with the super high attack speed, these basically never drop. Even when you get hit by enemies, it just ramps up in seconds again. So it's very nice defense, gives you like all the survivability and also some movement speed, which is nice. So this is just very helpful skill in general. And those two defensive powers are kind of like the bread and butter here of your defenses, including the life. Then we also have the Shared Misery here, as I mentioned at the start. This is just something I tried instead of a defensive power and I've really liked it. So if you really want to be more tanky, you could put like Assimilation here for fortifying and for extra dodge. But I really like the Shared Misery because you just puncture into one guy in a pack and then everything will get frozen, everything will get stunned. You get all of your damage multipliers that I just explained. So it's really nice, really smooth farming with this when you have Shared Misery on your gear. So I put this here. Now for the rest of the skill tree, as I said, we mostly just have mobility. You need Shadow Step and Dash because you need to activate your close quarters combat somehow you need to combine a melee and a range skill for this, and you want to use and hit an enemy every 8 seconds. So at least once every 8 seconds you need to do one dash or a shadow step and hit a target, and this is how you activate this damage buff. It's a pretty big damage buff. You want to make sure you don't miss out on this. So even when, for example, the boss is staggered and you're just standing there puncturing, every 8 seconds you want to do like a shadow step, for example. That's pretty important. And the rest, we have the caltrops, so especially on bosses you use this, especially right when you see the stagger bar filling up right to maximum, you throw down a caltrops and then you shadow step back into the boss, for example, and you start puncturing, and then you have like this big damage bonus here from the enhanced caltrops. And with extra caltrops duration, for example, that we can put on our weapons here, we have caltrops size, caltrops duration. It's very easy to keep this up. It's a big damage bonus, gives a bit of extra crit, so it's really nice all around. We also have the poison trap here. This is somewhat of an optional skill. For example, in this clip here, you also see a flurry being used with combo points. I have inner sight and no flurry. We have so much attack speed that I feel it's not really worth it, especially because the flurry buff is a 45% attack speed buff. Caps out in the same cap as most of our other stuff. So it doesn't really help us that much. We could maybe replace like 1 or 2 stats in our gear and put like life instead or something. But dealing with the flurry is kind of annoying, I felt. And I just kind of left that out here. Instead we have the poison trap, and you have the extra 10% damage for enemies standing in the poison trap. So this, you can also throw this on an elite pack, on a boss when they're staggered, and so on. And there's a knockdown, which is helpful. Down here we have just like a bunch of extra passives, in particular the poison passives. So we have debilitating toxins for damage reduction. Deadly venom is actually a good passive here because you do only poison damage. So you want to have that. Iconic advantage for even more attack speed. And I also have a 1-point in concealment here. So this is just mostly for comfiness and for hardcore reasons. You can replace this because you already have an unstoppable in Shadow Step. So you don't really need to rely on this, but I felt it's pretty nice. You can go with some other choices here, like Smoke Grenade, for example. But there's nothing really crazy. Maybe you can even do like a Death Trap that you throw sometimes or so. But I really like the concealment. Whenever I get stunned or whatever, you just press it, you have unstoppable. It feels pretty good. Now, some final notes about the gear as well. So there are some stats that may be looking a bit weird. For example, this % damage roll here on the weapons. We have this on a crossbow and on the melee weapons. Now, what you need to know about % damage is it double dips for dots. This is true apparently for all dots in the game ever since the game's creation. So it just applies twice. So every number that you see here with % damage, you have to do ×2. So technically this is the same value as just doing like damage over time. You see here this is exactly half of a damage over time roll, but technically I guess you do some non-dot damage with your punctures, which is pretty trivial. So % damage or damage over time, both are totally fine if you roll them on your gear. So don't throw away like a really good crossbow because it has damage over time. Technically, you know, you could also go for like vulnerable damage or so, but those numbers are definitely lower and also conditional. So you want to have one of those two here. Also for your armor tempers, you want to try to stack up different forms of crowd control on your utility tempers. So here we have a freeze, for example. This is how we activate Frigid Finesse, for example, and the Noxious Ice aspect. Here's a stun chance, so we can activate our retribution aspect, and it also just contributes to more stagger. If you spread out and have different forms of crowd control, you stagger bosses extremely fast. So you have a freeze, a stun, another freeze here just to have more consistency, and a slow. So you can do this. It can also have like an immobilize, for example, but you want to have at least one stun and one freeze, I would say, because those are pretty important for your damage multipliers. And then the other two, you kind of like just try to get something basically. But I like the slow as well because it gives you damage reduction from the paragons. Here on the cheap shot board, you have the damage reduction from slowed enemies. And with the shared misery, you can puncture one guy and you can spread it to other targets basically. So it's kind of like up to you to like combine this a little bit. And offensively, I mentioned the damage versus crowd control everywhere. We have agility cooldown reduction. This just helps a little bit with mobility, which is nice. You can also do caltrops cooldown or something. But I like the agility. And here, caltrops size, caltrops duration. If you don't have very good gear, then I recommend to go double caltrops duration. So before you really masterwork it up, for example, or so. The size is not too important. But at least late game, when you have really good gear, I want to try to have like a good amount of both, just so that you more easily hit the targets of the caltrops and then stack it up for a longer duration. And that's pretty much the entire setup. So I hope you enjoyed this guide. I had a ton of fun with the Andariel's rogue. I might go back to this if I do some more boss rotations, get another Andariel's, It was actually pretty nice, fun farming build, so I can only recommend it. If you have one of those helms lying around, then try it out, I guess. As I said, even here, this was like some pretty trash gear setup and it was working just fine. And if you like it, you can try to optimize more around it. So for now, that's what I got here. Hope you enjoyed this guide and I'll see you guys next time.